All right. So yesterday we left where we left off. The retrieval team were approaching the manor, but because Butler is wearing Holly's special goggles, he can see them. Without the goggles, they're invisible. They're using their mesmer sort of invisibility shields. But the idea is that the fairies vibrate so quickly that the human brain can't discern them, can't perceive them. Unfortunately, Butler is wearing the goggles, so he can see them. LEP Retrieval 1 were the best and the brightest. It was every little fairy's dream that one day he would grow up to don the stealth black jumpsuit of the Retrieval Commandos. These were the elite. Trouble was their middle name. In the case of Captain Kelp, Trouble... Sorry, I'm going to read that sentence again. These were the elite. Trouble was their middle name. That's an expression, isn't it? In the case of Captain Kelp, Trouble was actually his first name. He'd insisted on it at his manhood ceremony, having just been accepted into the academy. Trouble led his team down the sweeping avenue. As usual, he took the point position himself, determined to be the first into the fray, into the battle, if, as he fervently hoped, a fray developed. In the military, if you're on point, it means you're the first person in the column or the formation going into a situation or a fight. Check in, he whispered into the mic that wound snake-like from his helmet. Negative on 1. Nothing, Captain. A big negatory, Trouble. Captain Kelp winced. We're in the field, Corporal. Follow procedure. But Mummy said... I don't care what Mummy said, Corporal. Rank is rank. You will refer to me as Captain Kelp. Yes, sir, Captain, sulked the Corporal. But don't ask me to iron your tunic anymore. Trouble zeroed in on his brother's channel, shutting out the rest of the squad. You shut up about Mummy, will you? And the ironing, you're only on this mission because I requested you. Now start acting like a professional or get back to the perimeter. Okay, Trubs. Trouble, shouted Captain Kelp. It's Trouble, not Trubs or Trub. Trouble, okay. Okay, Trouble. Mummy's right, you're only a baby. Swearing very unprofessionally, Captain Kelp switched his headset back to the open channel. He was just in time to hear an unusual sound. Ugh. What was that? What? Dunno. Nothing, Captain. But Trouble had done a sound recognition in service for his captain's exam, and he was pretty sure the arc had been caused by someone getting a chop across the windpipe. A chop, meaning like a karate, a martial art chop across the windpipe. More than likely, his brother had walked into a shrub. Grub, you all right? That's Corporal Grub to you. Kelp viciously kicked a daisy. Check in, sound off in sequence. 1, okay. 2, fine. 3, bored but alive. 5, approaching west wing. Kelp froze. Wait. 4, you there, 4? What's your situation? Nothing, except static. Right, 4 is down, possibly an equipment malfunction. Still, we can't afford to take any chances. Regroup by the main door. So they're all spread out and they just have to count their numbers. So that way their leading officer, Captain Kelp, he knows who's missing, if anyone is missing. Retrieval 1 crept together, making slightly less noise than a silk spider, i.e. hardly any noise at all. Kelp did a quick head count. 11. 1 short of a full complement. 4 was probably wandering around the rose bushes, wondering why nobody was talking to him. Then Trouble noticed 2 things. 1, a pair of black boots was sticking out of a shrub beside the door, and 2, there was a massive human standing in the doorway. The figure was cradling a very nasty-looking gun in the crook of his arm. Go silent, whispered Kelp, and immediately 11 full-face visors slid down to seal in the sounds of his squad's breathing and communications. Now, nobody panic. I think I can trace the sequence of events here. 4 is skulking around outside the door. The Mudman opens it. 4 gets a whack on the noggin and lands in the bushes. Noggin meaning head. No problem. Our cover is intact. Repeat, intact. So, no itchy fingers, please. Grub. Sorry, Corporal Kelp. Check 4's vitals. The rest of you, make a hole and keep quiet. The squad stepped back carefully until they were standing on the manicured, grassy verge. The figure before them was indeed impressive. Without doubt, the biggest human any of them had ever seen. Darvit, breathed 2. Maintain radio silence except in emergencies, ordered Kelp. Swearing is hardly an emergency. Secretly, however, he concurred with the sentiment. This was one time he was glad to be shielded. That man looked as if he could squash half a dozen fairies in one massive fist. Grub returned to his slot. 4 is stable. Concussed, I guess, but otherwise okay. His shield's off, though, so I stuffed him in the bushes. Well done, Corporal. Good thinking. The last thing they needed was for 4's boots to be spotted. The man moved, lumbering casually along the path. He may have glanced left or right. It was difficult to tell beneath the hood pulled over his eyes. Odd for a human to wear a hood on such a fine night. Safety catches off, ordered Trouble. He imagined his men rolling their eyes, like they hadn't had their safeties off for the last half an hour. Still, you had to go by the book in case of a tribunal later on. Safety catches meaning they're on a weapon, on a gun. The safety catch, if the safety catch is on, if you accidentally pull the trigger, the gun won't fire. So you have the safety catch on at all times until you think you might actually have to fire it, then you take the safety catch off. I'm sure lots of you know that from video games and whatnot. He imagined his men rolling his eyes. Sorry, I've read that bit. There was a time when retrieval blasted first and answered questions later. Answered questions never, in fact, but not anymore. Now there was always some do-gooder civilian banging on about civilian rights. Even for humans, would you believe it? The Man Mountain stopped right in the middle of the squad. If he had been able to see them, it would be the perfect tactical position. Their own firearms were virtually useless, as they would probably do more damage to each other than the human. Fortunately, the entire squad was invisible, with the exception of 4, who were safely secreted in what appeared to be a rhododendron. Buzz buttons, fire 'em up, just in case. No harm in being cautious. And when the LEP officers were switching weapons, right at that moment when their hands were fumbling with holsters, that's when the Mudman spoke. "Evening, gentlemen," he said, sweeping back his hood. Funny that, thought Trouble. It was almost as if... Then he saw the makeshift goggles. "Cover!" he screamed. "Cover!" But it was too late. No option but to stand and fight. And that was no option at all. Butler could have taken them from the parapet, one at a time with the ivory hunter's rifle. But that wasn't the plan. This was all about making an impression. It was about sending a message. It was standard procedure with any police force in the world to send in the cannon fodder first before opening negotiations. It was almost expected that they would meet with resistance, and Butler was happy to oblige. He peeked out through the letterbox, and, oh, happy coincidence, there was a pair of goggled eyes peeking right back at him. It was too fortuitous to pass up. "Bedtime," said Butler, heaving the door with a mighty shoulder. The fairy flew several meters before alighting in the shrubbery. Juliet would be devastated. She loved rhododendrons. One down, several to go. Okay, so we're just sort of backtracking now. Okay, so this is what happened to number 4. So Butler is thinking that he could have just shot them all, but he's just they're not. That's not what the plan is. So number 4 had peeked through the letterbox, and then Butler had bashed the door open, knocking number 4 over. Butler pulled up the peaked hood on his field jacket, stepping into the porch. There they were, spread out like a squadron of action men. If not for the array of very proficient-looking weaponry hanging from each belt, it would have been almost comical. Sliding his finger casually under the trigger guard, Butler strode into their midst. The bulky one at 2 o'clock was giving the orders. You could tell from the heads angled his way. So when you, in the military, well, not just the military, if you want to tell somebody the position of an object or a person, you imagine a clock. So 12 o'clock is straight ahead of you, and then 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3, etc., all the way around to 11 o'clock, and then 12 o'clock. So 2 o'clock is just slightly over to the right of dead center. The bulky one at 2 o'clock was giving the orders. Okay, so Captain Kelp is at 2 o'clock to Butler. You could tell from the heads angled his way. The leader gave a command and the squad switched to close quarters weapons. It made sense. They'd only cut themselves to pieces with firearms. Time for action. So close quarters weapons, these are these buzz batons when you're having a fight with somebody who's very close to you. Evening, gentlemen. Okay, so now we've caught up with the timeline, okay? Evening, gentlemen, Butler said. He couldn't help it, and it was worth it for that one moment of consternation. Then his gun was up and blazing. Captain Kelp was the first casualty. A titanium-tipped dart puncturing the neck of his suit. He went down sluggishly as though the air had turned to water. 2 more of the squad were dropped before they had any idea what was going on. Okay, so Butler is using these tranquilizer darts, okay? He's not actually shooting them with bullets. It must be quite traumatic, thought Butler dispassionately, to lose an advantage that you've held for centuries. Okay, end of part 1.